Hello, thank you all for coming today. Want to introduce Julia Grubbs here from Small Batch Standard, and thank you very much for coming.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Awesome. Welcome to today's session, a post-lunch session. I hope you don't fall asleep, but maybe we have already had a beer, maybe only a couple at this point. So yeah, we've got a lot to cover. We're going to dive into some numbers, but what I really want you don't need to take a lot of notes. I want you to just kind of sit back and think about this mindset shift that we're going to have and that I'm asking you to kind of partake in. So I like to start this off with a story. About a year and a half ago, a client came to us and said, hey, I'm going to need $200,000 to get me through April of next year. And we said, huh? I'm going to need $200,000 to get me through April of next year. Summer was great, Q3 was okay, but I know winter, January through April, I'm going to need that money. We said, okay, well, what happened to ERC, PPP, all of that money? It's all gone, I'm going to go out and raise it. We said, well, before you do that, we want to figure out what actually happened to the cash, right? You sold a bunch of beer. Where did all that money go? And then that'll hopefully get us to number 2, how to actually make money selling your beer in this new market of 2024. My name is Julia Grubbs. I am a CPA and a brewery consultant with Small Batch Standard. Sometimes we go by SBS. SBS is the premier financial agency built to serve the craft industry. So we do that through outsourced accounting, bookkeeping, tax compliance, growth consulting, all that. We work with about 82 breweries, 4 distilleries, and 2 cideries, and we're kind of on a recurring basis, and then we do one-off engagements as well. And this is our team. So each one of us are really just working day in and day out, talking with people just like yourselves, helping you do your job better. So how many of you know exactly how much money hits your bank account when you sell a keg of beer? Okay, some of us. Do we have mostly owner-operators in the room? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. Any brewers? Okay, sales team? So if you're like some of the clients that come to us, right, knowing exactly how much is coming into your bank might be a little hazy for you. So I'm going to start with this brewery benchmark assessment that we do. One of my colleague did an on-site assessment for a brewery that was about 7 years old. Right, they had become a community mainstay in the area, and bars and restaurants were coming to them wanting their beer. Music festivals and colleges in the area, wanted to partner with them. And they even had a very solid tap room. On a Tuesday night when he got in, he expected to see kind of a somewhat sleepy tap room with maybe half the seats full. But this place was packed. And it was packed the next few nights as well. So why did they come to us, right? Well, despite the popularity of the brand and the busy tap room, even during weekday nights in the winter, the last year had shown a loss financially, and the year before that. Right? So even though they were selling every drop of the 4,000 barrels that they could produce, and they even had a contract to their IPA, right? They weren't making any money. And so they came to us to see what the problem was and what was the best path forward. So some of you guys might feel sort of the same way. So let's back up and see kind of how we got here. Who here remembers 2015? Yeah. How many of us were in business in 2015? Yeah? Okay. We call this the Big Bang of craft beer. Right? Customers wanted more, accounts wanted more. And you can see that through the number of craft breweries that were open in the US. From mid-2012 to 2015, the number of breweries more than doubled. Beer was flying off the tap. We didn't have to think that hard about kind of where the cash would come from. It was pretty easy to just sell beer and make money. We talked to customers about this point of the industry, and bars and restaurants were coming to them and asking for more kegs, right? So the Big Bang problems really were just producing more, which required more labor, more space, more tanks, right? But these were generally kind of good problems to have. More demand equals higher pricing. But now with the competition that we're seeing, the higher overhead to produce doesn't make sense at lower pricing. And so habits have developed in our industry. We cannot borrow cash and not know where it went, right? Business problems, where people think that we can just solve them by just brewing more beer and increasing our capacity. So breweries who rode the craft beer wave, they ended up overbuilding their capacity and committing to higher overhead. That's now weighing them down. Breweries who have opened more recently, they didn't ride the wave, but they still copied some of those behaviors because they saw them working in the past. And there's still a strong belief system that this is the path to growing a brewery. So our new method is a way to, one, break those counterproductive beliefs down, and two, provide a replacement for what to do to grow in the absence of those practices. So from 2015 to 2022, and now we are in 2024, we limped along, right? And where we are today with the financial struggles that we're seeing, we think actually should have happened in 2020, right? But we had a lifeline, we had cash coming in with ERC PPP. And you can see that, right? So we had the plateau 2018 to 2019, what we're calling the rescue in 2020 and 2021, and now is the reckoning. So now tap rooms have more competition, distributors are more selective, and the price of everything besides your beer has skyrocketed. It's a little bit harder, it's a little bit less fun, and we're talking with people every day who are saying that breweries down the street are closing, right? But you already knew that. So what do we think the problem is? We think that we're showing up to a 2024 market with a 2015 mindset. Before, you could produce more beer and go out and sell it. But now, somehow producing more beer isn't producing the cash like we would expect. And so breweries everywhere are spinning their wheels, and this hole is getting deeper. And at SBS, we've been obsessed with figuring this out. So we're gonna do a little group example today. They didn't do that well in the naming department, but we'll give them some grace. This hypothetical brewery is called Downtrend Beer Company. So we're gonna see if we can help them out. Whenever we get a new customer or client, we always ask for this. This is a rolling 12. It gives just a really good history of kind of where your business has been financially from inception to now. And so every point on this graph is the average of the previous 12 months. So it helps smooth out any anomalies that might happen with accounting inconsistencies or beer releases, things like that. So Downtrend started as a small tap room and a dream in 2014. They rode the boom. They signed with a distributor. They opened a larger second location with more production capacity, and they rode that success to 2018. And then demand leveled off. And then we all know what happened next. Dun, 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 COVID. And then we see that Nike swoosh kind of back up. But before that, their demand had started to decrease. And that's kind of like what Kathleen was showing this morning, that plateau, right? We're kind of seeing that. If we got your financials, it might look somewhat similar, right? Especially with that top line. Then we look at the gray line, and that's our COGS line, cost of goods sold. And we can see that it's tracked revenue, but it started to creep up, right? It went from about 35% of revenue to now about 45% of revenue. And they haven't been able to increase pricing to keep up. So today they're struggling with decreased distribution placement and lower taproom volume, despite an increase in SKUs and seemingly endless attempts at marketing their beer. And then we see the G&A line, that red line, and it has just been creeping up over time. They've cut some costs, but they've been struggling to control. Oh, and then let's look at their profit line. So their EBITDA, their earnings, basically earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. You just need to know their operating income. What are they keeping? And from 2016 to 2020, they show some profit, but they haven't really been able to get back to that. So this is their P&L for the year to date ended 2023. Now we've condensed this P&L. We've laid out the biggest expenses, but just lumped in the majority of other things that it takes to run their business into a category called other. So let's just not get caught up there. Excuse me. What this shows us is mediocre but bordering on poor performance, right? A loss of, if you can't see, about $23,000 for the year ended 2023. It's not bad enough to make you make some drastic changes, but it's just good enough to make you think that, okay, if we just stay the course and improve a little bit over time, that's going to get us where we want to go, right? You can maybe just fix it with some volume. So what would you recommend the small batch team do to help this company downtrend right the ship? Any examples of what you might want them to look at?
Sell it.
What?
Sell it.
Sell it. Okay. Well, before we sell it, what?
Let's look at payroll.
Look at payroll. Okay. Anything else?
Expenses.
Expenses. What expenses?
What's on other?
Other. Yeah, we often get hung up on that. Stop paying other. Yeah, we've heard lots of things. So just fire everyone. Okay. So we've asked some people, and we get some of those same responses, right? We could reduce taproom costs. We could get a canning line. We could, by increasing production, we could decrease unit cost. Does anybody remember when Mobcraft went on Shark Tank? It was a long time ago now at this point. But what happened was Mr. Wonderful Kevin O'Leary, he said to them, he said, you know, I know your industry. I know it pretty well. And I think it's overbuilt. There's 20 breweries in a city, and there's 20 canning lines in the city. And that's not truly how manufacturing was meant to operate. So we want to rethink how we purchase and use our capital assets. We could buy a new location. Maybe the first location wasn't in the best spot, so that's what we need. Hire a director of sales, move into regional distribution. We could find some new investors to fund the next stage of growth. Or we could launch a new beer. Maybe that next beer is our saving grace. But if we do nothing different and act on some of these suggestions, we're going to get what we saw play out over the past 2 to 5 years. And that got us here, right? Some marginal gains, maybe, but nothing really to turn it around. So what if there was something else? What if the problem wasn't that we didn't have the best product? What if it wasn't that we didn't pick the right location? What if it has nothing to do with whether we're working hard enough? What if it was that we weren't asking the right questions in the first place? Is downtrend really one business, or is it many? Many businesses that may or may not share the same characteristics, cost structures, demand, profit expectations. So at SBS, we're introducing what we're calling the brewery business units. Instead of viewing the brewery through one singular business to improve, we're going to break it down into its distinct business units in order to better understand why it's performing the way it is. So we've got the big three: taproom, distribution, contract, and then a little honorable mention for DDC. Added DDC on there, some of our clients are seeing it as a viable revenue stream. And same thing with contract, with a lot of that excess capacity in the area. We're seeing, if priced correctly, that it's becoming a good revenue stream for some clients. So these are the meaningfully different revenue streams, and you might have others. And cost structures, right, that I was referring to. So when separated, this prevents us from confusing ourselves with this one big blended mix, right? And that blended gives us no direct set of actions to take. So for example, you wouldn't compare a gas station food mart to a restaurant to a grocery store, right? They all have different business models. So So that'd be like apples and oranges and mangoes or something. But think about your brewery for a second and how different it is selling through your tap room versus distribution versus on your website. It feels like it belongs together because it's produced out of the same facility, but they have very different operating structures. So each business unit we could break down even further, right? So we've got tap rooms with no food, light food, full kitchens, self-distro, regional distribution, local distributors. But we're gonna keep it a little bit higher level for right now. So how does it work? We're gonna separate out the revenue and barrels. So determine how much revenue is coming in from each revenue stream. Hopefully that's really easy to see on your P&L. And then the number of barrels sold to produce that amount of revenue. Hopefully that is also really easy to know as well. And then we're gonna calculate our COGS for each of those. If your books are really great, this should be also straight on your P&L. We've got taproom specific COGS, distro specific COGS, and then any shared COGS that we would allocate. So how many of you know exactly what margins you're getting on your beer sold in distribution? Okay, so 3 little hands. Are we also factoring in overhead? Yeah. Are we factoring in G&A? All of G&A? How many of us are on a brewery management software? Okay. And then, so you might have done the first part, right, getting our COGS for each of those. And then we're gonna allocate G&A expenses to each of those. And this is kind of the missing step. So we're gonna divide up every single one of the remaining expenses and then use either a direct category, something like taproom supplies, or a percentage of barrels sold, right? But there are other methods as well. So I'm gonna walk you through an example of what this looks like, and then we'll dive into an analysis of downtrend. So for this period, they sold 128 barrels in the tap room and 257 in distribution and none in contract. So for the period, it was 385 barrels. So about a 1/3 to a 2/3 split. So for something like tap room supplies for that period, well, that's pretty easy, right? We don't need distribution to take any of that weight, so it's all gonna go towards the tap room. And then something like production labor. It takes the same amount of labor to produce 1 barrel of beer, regardless of which channel it's being sold in, right? So we're gonna split that up by the percentage of barrels. And same thing, 1/3 to a 2/3 split. So these are a few examples of how we would allocate each and every expense to the different business units. And then we apply this method to other methods. We could use revenue, you could use space, right, depending on what you think is actually driving that expense. And then we'll allocate them to either wholesale or retail. Right, so those are our first 3 steps. And then our 4th step, right? We actually have to take action on what's happening, right? What do we learn that we didn't see before? So let's look at downtrend. Back to their P&L, so that's about a -1% loss, right, for the last 12 months. Once again, not bad, right, not great. One of the reasons we're in business, not the only reason, but in order to stay in business, we do need to make money. So we have that 1% loss. So let's split it out. So like I said, it's really easy to see that revenue portion, and a lot of us can probably do that easily. We see our taproom sales versus our distribution sales. And then we split our COGS, right? So we've got our direct taproom COGS, and then any indirect we would split proportionally. And we could stop here and notice that, okay, it takes a relatively low amount of COGS to produce that amount of revenue in the taproom, which we know intuitively, but just want to keep that in mind. And then we're going to allocate everything else to either taproom or distribution. Now you'll notice here that we actually put all of the advertising expense towards the taproom. So we're really going to stress the taproom with that expense. right? Now, that might not be the case for you, but we want to just make sure we're putting a lot of load on the tap room with that expense. And then everything else will get split accordingly. Some portion of rent and utilities, depending on how we're allocating that. Our payroll expenses, right? All tap room labor is going to go towards the tap room, production labor split, like we talked about earlier. And then obviously no sales labor, because that's only going to go into our distribution business unit. And then some portion of other. So we've got tap room revenue for 2 locations, COGS and expenses, and that nets us a 19.7% profit. Right? Our benchmark for standalone tap rooms is 12 to 18%. So this is a very strong tap room. Now this might not be the case for you, and we could then address each of the individual benchmarks and see where we're falling. But let's go to distribution. Now the first thing we see here is COGS is quite a bit larger on this side, which we know that, right? Because the margins are smaller. So we could stop right here, right? If our COGS were out of line, out of benchmark, then we would stop right there and want to dive in. We've done this, with a client of ours, and we noticed that their bottles were truly just costing them too much, and that they were actually keeping too much on hand, so it was tying up their cash in inventory. So after allocating their COGS, we got about $860,000 in gross profit. And now here's where you might think, well, any additional revenue is helpful until you add in the remainder of G&A expenses. And then we have about $1.4 million outside of COGS, right? We allocated all advertising towards the tap room, and still we're running at a major loss. So we could once again stop right here and say, okay, is our production labor, are we staffed for our busiest season and we're not producing the volume like we used to be? So we've got about negative $500,000 in earnings. Now remember, we had a blended 1% loss. It's not good, but not as bad to make you think you need to take drastic action, right? But negative 31%, that's where we know we need drastic action. So we can see where the cash is going now. It's going to distribution for this brewery, right? Now this is great information, but we can't stop here. We see that distro is the issue, but what about it is the issue? So we're going to dive even deeper and look at this on a SKU level. So here we've identified that the half barrel kegs and the 12-ounce cases are the most popular SKUs. So we're just going to uncover what each of these are doing for us. So we've got a half barrel kegs at cost of $147 and 12-ounce case cans at $28. Then we've got our item COGS, right, for each item that goes into that SKU. But looking at them in this way doesn't really give us a good comparison, right? We need a common denominator. So we're going to use barrels. So what this tells us right off the bat is that the case of cans can command a much more significant pricing premium than the kegs, which is what we would expect, right? Now for your reference, our target revenue per barrel, if you're working with a distributor, is $300 per barrel, right? If you're in self-distro, it's at least $500, $525. So based on that metric, we can see that the kegs are a little bit low, and then the cans are above the target. But with that said, we can't really see the full picture until we start looking at the COGS. So we want to look at the COGS on a per barrel basis as well. And here we have the same costs for all the ingredients and everything that goes into the kegs versus the cans. However, when we get down to packaging is when we see quite the big difference, right? And we can see the kegs are fairly inexpensive and the cans are pretty pricey. Now, this might not be the case for you. We stopped here with one of our customers and we were able to see, their keg rental prices were just out of control, right? So then they were able to determine what products they can actually sell in distribution in kegs and actually be profitable, right? So that's an undertaking of this exercise, what you can uncover. And you can also see that we have a little bit more waste and stuff from the cans as well. And waste and other stuff is actually quite a big portion of our COGS. So we sum all that up, and we've got a gross profit of $185 for the half barrel and $187 for the case cans. Gives us a margin, gross margin, of 63% and 49%. Now it seems like you should be able to scale this up as much as you like, but unfortunately that's not how this works. Because then we have our G&A per barrel. Now remember that red line on the rolling 12? Right, this is where it's coming into play. So we've got a G&A per barrel of $4.40, and that's give us a negative earnings of $2.55 for the kegs, and negative $2.53 for the case of cans, and that gives us an earnings percentage for each half barrel that we sell, a loss of 87% and 65% respectively. So this is the reality, right? So where do we go from here? I'm not telling you to stop wholesale. I'm just asking you to get honest with your numbers. Total net margins we're seeing in distributions 1 to 5%. So this brewery needs a sizable swing. Let that sink in just a little bit, 1 to 5%. So often we get the question, what barrelage do I need to get to be profitable? However, this problem is not solved by volume. This problem is exacerbated by volume, right? Once you get to that 20,000 barrel mark, okay, we're starting to see some of those economies of scale that manufacturing is meant to operate in. But below that, this is what we're seeing. So what would we recommend? We're gonna change up our keg strategy, right? Like I said, with that customer I was talking about. We had to figure out exactly what products they could actually sell in kegs and distribution to be profitable. The kegs are the biggest issue we see at the moment for this IPA that it was. And there's a number of different ways they could go about it. They could raise prices, they could shift production away from the half barrel kegs, or they could do some combination of both of that. But basically working with the distributor and saying, hey, we cannot sell this product in this fashion. It's not working for us. So what can we do? So this is the first immediate action that they should take. And then we're gonna address the G&A. Is our labor bloated from when we were producing more beer? Is it our utilities and our occupancy costs associated with our building? Or our repairs and maintenance, right? Bottom line, what's the issue here? What are we spending our money on? And it's going to be a deep and difficult journey, but it's necessary, right? Now, some of these things I know you can't change overnight, but they might factor into the long-term decisions, or it might make you think a little bit out of the box and say, how can we alleviate some of this overhead that we currently have? And then we're gonna analyze the other SKUs. We only looked at the highest volume IPA to start, but there's probably others that are doing worse, right? How can you focus your distribution portfolio to make sure that it's actually profitable and not sending out the door at a loss, right? We also get the question sometimes, oh, can you send it out in distribution knowing that it's a loss, but it's for marketing or advertising? Sure, if you can quantify exactly how much and you're willing to use that as advertising. One of our clients, they sell one product at a strict 2% loss that they know, but every other product makes up for that loss, right? So speaking of analyzing other things, let's analyze their taproom. And for this brewery, the taproom is not the problem here, right? They are hitting that 12 to 18% benchmark, even exceeding it a little bit. So we're gonna keep doing that. Now it's shocking to see, holy crap, we're losing money on what we thought was gonna be our biggest moneymaker, right? But on the flip side of the coin, we actually have a pretty freaking awesome taproom there. And so we wanna make sure that we're focused on it and can continue to do really, really well there. And then we're gonna build on that success. If we shift some focus, right, we only have so much focus as a business owner, shift some of our focus away from distribution, what opportunities for expansion does that open up on the taproom side? Now this, once again, may not be the case for your company. If you're not at that 12 to 18% benchmark after this exercise, you may need to look at each category and check on your benchmarks there. Front of house labor, back of house labor, food cogs, merch cogs, right? What levers can we pull to make that happen? So let's compare. Some of those suggestions, getting a canning line, reducing taproom costs, right? These aren't bad. They're just not the right moves for this company at this point in their life cycle, right? Why? Because they're too general, right? We need to go from the surface level where we could get the wrong conclusion into a more specific set of course corrections that they can take. So we might not expand into regional distribution. We might actually stop some. We're not going to get a canning line. We don't want to add any more elements to our expense structure. Maybe we're sitting on too much inventory and wouldn't need all that space if we had less inventory, right? These are some short-term things we can solve, but some of them are a little bit longer term as well. And then we're going to double down on the tap room. We don't want to cut costs and rob the cash cow of its firepower, right? So we want to look to continue and further enable its success. So what now, right? So revisiting that on-site assessment that my colleague did, right? We performed this analysis and then we interviewed the director of sales. And that's when we really understood what was driving their loss, right? This person had grown up in the company, been a beer tender, shifted to sales, and then was able to take over from the prior director of sales and running that part. But she was set up to fail because she was simply told to sell as much as possible. No guidelines, no understanding of margins, just sell. So that's what she did. But the biggest problem was that without the knowledge of overhead or margins, right, the more beer that her team was pushing, the bigger the gap became, right? She was selling half-barrel kegs to all of her customers, not knowing that it was going out the door at a loss. And she was happy to be giving them that price at the price that had been given to her years ago, right? But what she didn't understand was that, despite being in self-distro and having to pay a salesperson, a delivery driver, a line cleaner, her pricing was actually closer to working with a distributor than it was self-distro. And so every keg was losing the money. And so while the tap room was making close to about 15% earnings for them, the losses from distribution were just eating up all of the earnings that the tap room was doing. And it created those losses year over year. So we want this to be a set of next steps that you can take back and apply for your business. So what are you going to do? You're going to run a year-to-date P&L. You're going to split out the revenue by business units, right, and the number of barrels sold to produce that revenue. We want to find the COGS for each of those. Like I said, hopefully this is really easy. You can see on your P&L. Otherwise, you might have to do some spreadsheet action. And then you're going to allocate all those other expenses, right, using the methodology I laid out. So either direct, or if you don't know what to do, just use a percentage of barrels sold, right? And revenue works for a revenue split, works for some other expenses. And then you're going to take action, right? What do you see now that you didn't see before? What changes? What decisions am I going to make? Right? It's not useful unless we actually use it to make decisions. Oh, sorry. I can put that up. Or we can do it for you. So anyone here or that gets this from the guild after, through the end of, what month am I in? March? So through the end of April, everything you saw me do, we will do for free. If you're distributing, I highly recommend going to this website. We'll collect a little bit of information from you, and then we'll send back a 2-page report with some conclusions and recommendations. So yeah, And that's all I have. Any questions? Yeah.
How do you, so like a lot of your analysis is based on like barrels sold. For those of us who have a kitchen as a major component of our business, like how would you say like allocate rent or property taxes between like kitchen, tap room, wholesale, or is the tap room and the kitchen all under one?
We would combine the kitchen and the tap room all in one. You would want to be able to see, right, so we would also want to do an analysis of just maybe your food program specifically, but as far as just the actual allocation, we would consider the kitchen and the tap room together. As far as rent, we are kind of doing a little bit of square footage analysis along with the production space then gets split into your production square footage gets split by barrels, and then the rest gets split by a space component, right? So we're kind of doing a multi-factor for the occupancy costs of like rent. Does that answer your question? Cool.
On canning materials like pack tag, flats, labels, lids, all that. But does that include the beer inside the can as well? Because that $85 number was really high. If someone's sourcing aluminum and pack tag and all that, and it costs $85 a barrel before you put beer in, it's insane.
Yeah. So that was everything that goes into the beer.
Beer included, like the liquid.
Yes, liquid included.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the profit of the tap room, you're recognizing the sales of the beer in the tap room. Are you also recognizing the production and distribution of sales to that tap room?
Yeah. So we don't actually see it. We don't think of selling from the back of the house to the front of house. So no, the tap room isn't
Free beer.
right. So that's the benefit we think of running your own tap room is that you are producing your own beer. But no, we don't sell it from the back of house to the front of house. Yeah. There's still costs associated with it, but we don't actually recognize that revenue on the distribution side.
But if they're two separate entities,
Two businesses,
you not recognize that transaction.
like two fully separate, like EINs, two
No,
businesses.
right now, if you break it out as two businesses,
Got it. No, so we are.
the tap room successful because it gets free beer.
We don't call it. You're still going to recognize the cost of the beer, but you're not recognizing the sale in dollars on the distribution side. Does that make sense? It shows up in the COGS on the tap room side. You're not getting free beer. Yeah. So you're recognizing that cost. Sorry, I didn't understand your question. Anything else? Yeah.
So for like a model that has like a kitchen and tap room, so does this example have a full kitchen?
I don't think so. No. Yeah. No.
So I was wondering like what kind of labor percentage or payroll expense can you expect for like a full kitchen plus a staffing model?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are, depending on the type of, if it's totally full restaurant model, so you have hosts, servers, bussers, all that, 30 to 35% of your total revenue on that taproom side, including food revenue and beer revenue.
Are you including your brewers in that?
No, sorry, total just taproom
Back of
labor.
house?
Yes, back of
And
house.
front house?
And front of house, yes. That's 30 to 35%. If you are operating with maybe QR codes, or you have one section that's order at the bar or different things like that, that changes those percentages. But if you are operating full restaurant, as in someone is taking your order and servers and hosts and all that, that's 30 to 35%, and that's consistent.
For QR code and kind of counter service, you expect it to be.
Yeah, so it depends. For like New York in a higher to minimum wage state, we're operating at 20 to 24. Yeah. And that's full kitchen, right? But just kind of no hosts. Yeah.
What about like ownership, compensation, and management? Where's that?
So that's more, we don't benchmark that, have a specific benchmark for that, because we think kind of owner seat last a little bit. So that would be fall in more of that G&A other line. Yeah. But we do benchmark, you've got your departments, back of house, front of house, tap room, production, sales, admin. Yeah.
So it's not technically my situation, but like if you are somebody under that 20,000 barrel mark, right, where you are chasing that volume, here I'll stand. So you are chasing that volume, right? You are looking to try to like get to that point, and you've already made that investment, but you're not going to get to 20,000. What would you say to an owner of a brewery like that, right, who's already made the capital investment in the production space and everything like that, but realizes my bottom line is chasing my top line, and I kind of don't know what to do now. So do you try to offload equipment and use that revenue that you make, or that money that you gain back from that, in investing in the tap room, or like what would you look at in that scenario?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I feel like sometimes some of these are going to be, right, we might have 4 different ideas and we might have to try 2 first before we get to that. So maybe at some point you do get to that selling equipment. Right, but that probably isn't going to be your first step, right? So often, one of our clients, they had a bunch of extra space. They ended up expanding, and you move some of they were able to kind of scale down their production, what they actually needed on the production side, right? By going a little bit leaner with inventory, all that stuff. And they put in pickleball courts, right? And they got really associated with the league and that, and so they were able to kind of offset some of that. By either an additional revenue, subletting out the space, working with another partner who has a coffee shop during the day, running that out, hosting different events in the space first, right? So trying all of those options first before maybe getting to that point. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the spot a lot of people are in is, oh shit, we already committed to all of this overhead, right? Now what?
Well, that's the reason that I talk to my friends who have larger breweries, right? Like we're under 1,000 in our place, right? So everything is capital focused. It's kind of been that way since the beginning. I see friends of mine, they've already invested in the equipment. They already did the thing, and they're like, now I don't know, do we sign with the distributor? What do we do now? And they're kind of caught in that chasing game, right? Because I spoke to an owner of a brewery in Connecticut where I came from before this, who they built a big production facility, and he was super excited about it, and I was congratulating him, like, you did a great job. He goes, nothing has changed. I make the same amount of money, the numbers are just bigger on my balance sheet. And that is, I see that as like a sickness in this industry almost.
Yeah.
Is that like everybody wanted to get big fast because like that was the big shiny ticket.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually was just working with somebody the other day and saying, okay, so if you happen to add in distribution 500 barrels just in one site, right? So you added 500 barrels in distribution. Okay, cool. That's at $300 per barrel, right? If you're working with a distributor, extra $150K. Okay, so how much that's actually contributing to the rest of the business was, I think it was about 35% contribution margin based on their production labor, sales labor, etc. And then the actual net that it was keeping them was $7,500. And I thought, wow, if you really think about that, right, we spent all this time and effort to get $150,000 extra dollars. And we're only truly keeping $7,500 of it.
Doesn't even pay for one of the employees that you
Yeah, so it's just a little bit of a mindset shift. Now, that doesn't mean they can't do anything, right? Actually, what products are you selling? How can we sell them at better margins? How can we shift our strategy, right? That example I was talking about, she just was told to sell. And that brings up something too, is our sales team selling what we actually want them to sell and what's actually going to make us money, right? Are we having those conversations so that they know, oh, you know what? This is actually better for us, so I'm going to start pressing this, right? Sometimes we're doing a lot of things, so sometimes we're not having those specific conversations. So I think this exercise gives you the opportunity to do that. Yeah, great question. Thanks. Anything else? Yeah.
So what percentage would you expect like front house versus back of house to be for say a restaurant?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. If you email me, I can send it to you because I think it depends. I think we benchmark back of house strictly off of. I'm trying to remember if it's strictly off of total taproom revenue or just off of the food revenue. But
Yeah, it's tough like to say it's just based on just the food revenue when it drives tap sales.
right, yeah, email me and I'll get that to you. Anything else? Let's see, it is 1:45. All right, thanks so much, guys. If you have anything else, I'll be up here. My card is up here as well.